He was the most famous man on television, yet he died almost completely alone. Johnny Carson, the legendary host of The Tonight Show, spent 30 years making America laugh, but behind the scenes, his final years were marked by silence, regret, and isolation. How did a man so loved by millions end up cutting himself off from nearly everyone in his life? Join us as we uncover the tragic and lonely death of Johnny Carson, a shy boy from Nebraska. Johnny Carson, the man who would later become the king of late night, had a childhood that was quiet, lonely, and shaped by emotional distance. He was born on October 23, 1925, in the small town of Corning, Iowa. His family moved several times before settling in Norfolk, Nebraska, where he spent most of his early years. Norfolk was a calm, Midwestern town, and Johnny's life there was far from glamorous. He wasn't the center of attention or the life of the party. In fact, he was shy, withdrawn, and preferred to stay in his own world. As a boy, Johnny was bookish and quiet. He didn't play sports or join big groups. Instead, he spent hours alone, reading and practicing magic tricks. He became fascinated by sleight of hand and performance. It gave him a way to speak without having to open up emotionally. Magic became his escape. It gave him control in a world where he often felt uncertain. He would perform for neighbors and schoolmates, and later, for larger groups. This early love for performance planted the seeds for his future in entertainment. But, at the time, it was more about hiding than shining. The root of Johnny's emotional struggles started at home. His mother, Ruth Carson, was known to be cold and critical. She didn't give Johnny much warmth or affection. No matter what he did, whether it was good grades, successful magic shows, or just being a well-behaved child, he never felt like he could win her approval. She was a strong, controlling presence in the house, and many people who knew the family say that she didn't show much interest in Johnny's feelings or dreams. His father, Homer Carson, worked as a power company manager. He was more passive, and while he wasn't unkind, he wasn't emotionally present either. This left Johnny with a deep sense of being alone, even within his own family. Johnny tried for years to get his mother's attention and praise. He once said that every time he got a laugh on stage, he imagined it was for her, hoping she'd notice. But she rarely showed pride in his success. Her coldness affected him deeply. This emotional distance didn't just hurt him, it shaped him. Over time, Johnny learned to keep his feelings hidden. He built a wall around his emotions. That wall would stay with him for the rest of his life, even when millions of people were watching him on television every night. These early years in Nebraska didn't just shape Johnny's personality. They created a lasting pattern. He would always keep people at a distance. He became a master at being charming and funny on the outside, while hiding everything personal on the inside. Next, we'll see how this quiet boy from Nebraska turned into a star, but still couldn't escape the loneliness. A star is born. After a quiet, emotionally distant childhood in Nebraska, Johnny Carson entered adulthood with a mixture of ambition and hesitation. He was intelligent, talented, and driven, but also extremely private and unsure of how to connect with people on a deeper level. His first major life experience outside of Nebraska was joining the U.S. Navy during World War II. At just 18 years old, he enlisted in 1943 and was trained as a midshipman. He hoped to become a Navy pilot, but the war ended before he saw combat. Instead, he worked as a communications officer. During his time in the Navy, Johnny entertained shipmates with magic tricks and stand-up routines. But the strict, disciplined environment didn't come naturally to him. While he followed orders and did his job, military life was in conflict with who he really was. Quiet, introverted, and independent. He kept to himself and avoided emotional conversations. His time in the Navy helped him grow up quickly, but it didn't change his reserved personality. In many ways, it just made him more skilled at hiding it. After leaving the Navy, Johnny attended the University of Nebraska. He majored in radio and speech, and it was clear that he had a natural talent for entertaining. He worked at local radio stations, gaining experience behind the microphone, and learning the flow of live broadcasting. He eventually moved to California, where he began writing comedy and performing on television. His big break came when he hosted a daytime game show called Who Do You Trust? In the late 1950s. The show was low budget, but Johnny's quick wit and charm stood out. He was clever, fast, and always one step ahead of the conversation. Viewers loved him. That success led to the biggest job of his life, taking over The Tonight Show in 1962. At just 36 years old, Johnny Carson stepped into one of the most powerful roles in television. Over the next 3 decades, he became a nightly presence in American homes. Millions of people watched him every evening. He interviewed celebrities, delivered sharp monologues, and made the audience laugh with his perfectly timed jokes. His comfort on camera was unmatched. He never seemed nervous or unsure. He appeared confident, cool, and in control. But what the public saw was only one part of Johnny Carson. Off camera, he was a very different man. While he was warm and funny on stage, he was quiet, guarded, and often distant in real life. He avoided large gatherings and rarely showed emotion. He didn't let people get too close, even those who worked with him for years. Johnny had a small circle of trusted staff, but even they often said they didn't really know him. He could be kind one moment and cold the next. He kept his personal life hidden behind a wall. As his fame grew, so did his discomfort with being known. He hated doing interviews and avoided them whenever possible. He once said that if he hadn't gone into show business, he would have been happy working in radio where nobody could see him. He didn't enjoy red carpets or Hollywood parties. He wasn't interested in the spotlight that came with fame. He just wanted to do the show and go home. Even when he was at the peak of his career, early signs of emotional withdrawal were already there. He didn't keep many close friends. He rarely socialized outside of work. His relationships, both romantic and professional, often suffered because of his inability to open up. Viewers saw a confident man with perfect timing. What they didn't see was someone who struggled with loneliness and insecurity every day. So while Johnny Carson became one of the most beloved figures on television, the man behind the smile remained a mystery, hidden, guarded, and often alone. Search for love and control. Johnny Carson was married 4 times, but none of his relationships brought him the deep connection or peace he seemed to be searching for. While millions saw him as a charming, funny, and confident man, the people closest to him often described someone who was emotionally distant, controlling, and hard to reach. His love life reflected that. Each marriage followed a familiar pattern: passion in the beginning, followed by frustration, emotional detachment, and eventually separation. Johnny married his college sweetheart, Jody Merrill Wolcott, in 1948. They had met while attending the University of Nebraska. At the time, Johnny was just beginning his journey in broadcasting, and Jody was a familiar part of his early life. Their relationship started like many young romances, full of hope and excitement, but things began to fall apart quickly. Johnny later admitted that he knew early on the marriage wasn't going to work. He was young, insecure, and already showing signs of the emotional walls he would carry for the rest of his life. The couple had 3 sons together: Christopher, Corey, and Richard. But even fatherhood didn't bring Johnny closer to his family. He was often absent, focused on work, and emotionally unavailable when he was home. Throughout the marriage, there were constant rumors of affairs on both sides. Trust was never strong between them. Johnny's career was taking off, and with his growing fame came temptation and distance. He wasn't built for a stable, traditional family life, and he didn't know how to be open and emotionally present. Their relationship was full of arguments and hurt feelings. They divorced in 1963 after 15 rocky years. By that time, Johnny had already begun to emotionally detach from not only his wife, but also his children. Soon after his divorce from Jody, Johnny married Joanne Copeland in 1963. Joanne was elegant, ambitious, and very much a part of the Hollywood scene. At first, she was seen by many as the perfect match, a glamorous woman for a man now fully immersed in celebrity life. This was the trophy wife era of Johnny's life. Joanne was supportive of his career and appeared to enjoy the spotlight, but it didn't take long for cracks to appear. As Johnny's fame grew, the distance between them widened. He remained emotionally guarded, and Joanne struggled to find her own identity beyond being Johnny Carson's wife. Over time, she became more independent and began seeking out her own interests and causes, especially in charity work. This shift in power didn't sit well with Johnny. He preferred control and routine in his relationships. He also continued to have affairs, a pattern that had already become part of his private life. The marriage ended in 1972 after 9 years. Though the divorce wasn't as messy as some celebrity breakups, it was still painful. Joanne later described Johnny as cold and emotionally closed off. She once said he had no clue how to show love. Their marriage had started with great hope, but like the first one, it ended with silence and emotional distance. Johnny didn't stay single for long. In 1972, the same year his second divorce was finalized, he met and married Joanna Holland, a former model. The wedding came as a surprise to most people, including Johnny's friends. It was sudden and private, just like many of his personal decisions. Their marriage lasted for 10 years, but it came to a shocking end. On their 10th anniversary, during what should have been a celebratory dinner, Joanna handed Johnny divorce papers. She had planned it carefully, knowing that a face-to-face conversation might not be possible with a man who avoided emotional conflict. The divorce quickly became one of the biggest celebrity splits of the time. Johnny was ordered to pay over $20 million, a record-breaking settlement for that era. Behind the scenes, the same problems had returned. Johnny had repeated old habits, pulling away emotionally, refusing to open up, and continuing a lifestyle that included multiple affairs. Joanna had tried to make it work, but in the end, she knew she couldn't change him. He was still, as always, the man behind the wall, charming in public, unreachable in private. Johnny's fourth and final marriage was to Alexis Moss in 1987. This time, the relationship was different in some ways. Alexis was much younger and not part of the Hollywood scene. She kept a low profile, and their life together was quiet. They mostly avoided the spotlight and spent time at Johnny's Malibu estate or on his yacht. For a while, it seemed that Johnny had finally found peace, but those who knew him said that even with Alexis, he stayed emotionally distant. Their relationship was calm and steady, but not deeply intimate. Alexis provided companionship and stability, but Johnny never fully let her in either. Friends described the marriage as more of a partnership than a romantic connection. He trusted her, but the emotional barriers were still there. By then, Johnny had grown tired of love's drama. He wasn't looking for fireworks anymore, just quiet, routine, and someone who wouldn't challenge his need for space. Alexis gave him that. They remained married until Johnny's death in 2005. Looking at all 4 marriages, a clear pattern appears. Johnny Carson struggled with intimacy throughout his life. He needed to be in control, feared vulnerability, and had trouble expressing emotions. His relationships followed the same cycle: early excitement, emotional distance, then collapse. His repeated affairs only made things worse, often breaking trust beyond repair. He once said, "My giving up women is like giving up cigarettes." That comment wasn't just a joke. It was an honest sign of someone who didn't know how to be close without feeling trapped. Love, for Johnny, was always complicated. It was something he chased, but could never truly hold on to. A father's greatest loss. Johnny Carson was many things to many people: comedian, host, and entertainer. But as a father, he struggled deeply. He had 3 sons with his first wife, Jody Merrill Wolcott: Christopher, Corey, and Richard, who was often called Ricky. While Johnny was building his career and becoming a household name, he spent less and less time at home. The long work hours, constant travel, and his emotional distance left a gap between him and his children that was never fully closed. Those who knew the family say Johnny was not a very involved father. He provided for his kids financially, but he wasn't present in their everyday lives. He rarely showed affection and often kept a cool, distant tone, even with his sons. As they grew up, the relationship remained strained. The boys often lived in the shadow of their father's fame, and Johnny didn't make much of an effort to bridge the emotional gap. His oldest son, Christopher, became a golf pro and stayed out of the public eye. Corey, the middle son, followed a similar low-profile path. But it was Ricky, the youngest, who had the most visible and tragic story. Ricky Carson had a creative side, much like his father. He enjoyed photography and had a love for nature, but he also struggled with emotional and mental health challenges, including substance abuse. His life was unstable at times, and he had trouble finding direction. On June 21, 1991, Ricky died in a terrible car accident in Los Angeles. He was just 39 years old. Reports said he had been driving along a hilly road, trying to take photographs for a nature project. He lost control of his car, which plunged down an embankment and hit a tree. The crash was fatal. News of Ricky's death shocked many, but Johnny stayed mostly silent in public. He released a short statement expressing sadness but made no further comments. There were no interviews, no appearances, and no public displays of grief. But those who knew him privately said the loss devastated him. He had always been emotionally guarded, but Ricky's death hit something deep. It was one of the few times friends and staff said they saw him truly shaken. Even so, he did not open up about it, not even with close friends. He kept the pain inside. Some of Johnny's longtime friends believe he carried guilt over his relationship with Ricky. They said he regretted the emotional distance he had maintained and blamed himself for not being more present in his son's life. But true to form, Johnny never talked about it. He didn't go to therapy, and he never addressed the loss in any meaningful way. It was one more example of his lifelong pattern: hide the pain, stay in control, and never let the outside world see what's really going on. Johnny Carson never recovered from Ricky's death. Though he continued working for a short while after, something changed in him. He became even more withdrawn. In his final years, he lived quietly and rarely spoke about his family at all. Feuds and fallout. Behind the camera and away from the laughs, Johnny Carson was a complicated and often difficult man. He was respected in the entertainment world, but not necessarily loved by those who worked closely with him. For decades, he ruled late-night television with charm and control. But behind that polished image was a man who held deep grudges, kept his distance, and rarely let anyone get too close. His long-standing feuds, especially with Joan Rivers and Wayne Newton, pulled back the curtain on a darker, more personal side of Johnny Carson. Joan Rivers was one of Johnny Carson's biggest success stories at first. In the 1960s and 70s, she appeared often as a guest on The Tonight Show and eventually became his regular guest host when he was away. Carson had a hand in helping her rise, and she often credited him for opening doors in her career. But that all changed in 1986 when Rivers accepted an offer from Fox to host her own late-night show, The Late Show, starring Joan Rivers. The moment she made the decision, everything between them collapsed. Carson saw her move as a deep betrayal. She hadn't told him personally before the news went public, and that more than anything, enraged him. He believed she owed him loyalty and honesty. After all, he had given her one of her biggest breaks. To Carson, leaving for a competing network, especially without a personal phone call, was unforgivable. He never spoke to Joan Rivers again. Not once. She reached out many times over the years. She wrote him letters, tried to call, and even asked mutual friends to step in. But Johnny refused to respond. He wouldn't even say her name in interviews. In public and in private, he completely shut her out of his life. This wasn't just about business. It was personal. Johnny Carson had a deep sense of pride and loyalty. And when he felt that trust had been broken, there was no going back. His reaction revealed something many people who worked with him already knew. Carson could hold a grudge forever. There was no middle ground. Once someone was out, they were out for good. Joan Rivers later said that Carson's silence hurt her more than any professional setback. She never stopped trying to make peace, but Carson stayed silent all the way to his death, in 2005. Another one of Carson's most well-known feuds was with singer Wayne Newton. It started with what seemed like a simple, late-night joke. Johnny made comments on The Tonight Show that mocked Newton's masculinity, suggesting he was overly flamboyant or effeminate. At first, Newton ignored the comments, but as they kept coming, he decided he'd had enough. Wayne Newton didn't just complain, he confronted Carson in person. Newton walked straight into Carson's office at NBC, closed the door, and let him know face-to-face that he wasn't going to tolerate the jokes anymore. According to Newton, Carson backed down immediately. He didn't apologize, but he didn't argue either. Newton said Carson looked nervous and clearly didn't want a direct confrontation. This moment showed something important about Carson. He had a sharp tongue and wasn't afraid to use humor to mock others, especially from the safety of the stage. But when it came to face-to-face conflict, he usually avoided it. He didn't like being challenged. He didn't want to deal with emotional scenes or personal pushback. It was easier to keep people at a distance and maintain control from afar. Stories from The Tonight Show staff and longtime colleagues reveal even more about the pressure of working under Carson. While he could be kind and generous at times, many people walked on eggshells around him. Writers were nervous about pitching jokes that might upset him. Guests had to be careful not to cross a line. Even his producers sometimes found him hard to read. Johnny had total control of the show, and he didn't like being questioned. If someone disappointed him, it was rare they got a second chance. Some writers said they lived in fear of being fired without warning. Others noted that even after years of working together, Johnny still kept a professional wall between himself and almost everyone on the team. He rarely had close friendships in the entertainment industry. He didn't socialize much with other celebrities, and after the show, he often went straight home or retreated to private spaces. For all his power and success, Johnny was a solitary figure. He liked having the last word, but it came at a cost: isolation. His ability to hold a grudge, his discomfort with emotional honesty, and his need for control made it hard for him to build long-term trust with anyone in the business. Many admired him, but few truly knew him. And for Johnny Carson, that was exactly how he preferred it: alcohol and isolation. For much of his adult life, Johnny Carson relied on alcohol as a way to cope. He wasn't known for wild partying or dramatic public meltdowns, but his drinking was consistent, serious, and sometimes destructive. Those who worked with him, or knew him personally, say he could be charming and funny one moment, then cold and cruel the next, especially when he was drinking. Carson's relationship with alcohol began early in his career and followed him all the way into retirement. He drank heavily, often in private, and used it as a way to deal with stress, anxiety, and loneliness. When he was sober, he could be quiet and distant. When he drank, his mood would shift quickly. Some insiders described him as moody and sharp-tongued when under the influence, cutting people down with biting remarks that hit harder than any joke he told on stage. Several former staff members, assistants, and acquaintances said that Johnny had a mean streak when drunk. He wasn't physically violent, but he could be verbally cruel, especially with people he felt had disappointed him. He didn't tolerate mistakes well, and alcohol only made that worse. He could become icy or sarcastic, often without warning. Some people learned to stay out of his way during those moods. There were also darker episodes early in his career, things that never made headlines but were quietly handled behind the scenes. Johnny had a few run-ins with the law for drinking-related incidents, including multiple DUIs. He was once involved in a bar fight, and there were whispers of other embarrassing moments while drunk. But because he was such a valuable star for NBC and such a well-known public figure, many of these incidents were covered up or quietly resolved before they became public scandals. Despite being one of the most famous men in America, Johnny Carson led an incredibly solitary life. He didn't have many hobbies. He wasn't part of any tight-knit Hollywood circles. He didn't enjoy parties or social gatherings. On weekends, especially later in life, he would often retreat to his yacht alone. He liked being on the ocean, away from the noise and attention. But even there, he was alone most of the time. It wasn't that he didn't want company, he just didn't know how to let people in. And yet, even in his final years, Johnny never publicly talked about his struggles. He didn't admit to the pain, or the drinking, or the loneliness. Just like always, he kept it all behind a wall, the slow fade. When Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in May 1992, he didn't just step away from television, he disappeared almost entirely from public life. Unlike many entertainers who look for a second act or hang around in the spotlight, Carson meant it when he said goodbye. He had spent 30 years as the king of late-night television, but once he walked off that stage, he made it clear he was done. There were no more appearances, no guest spots, and no surprise cameos. He wanted privacy, and he got it. In the years after his retirement, Carson rarely spoke to the media and didn't give interviews. He turned down invitations to attend public events, including major TV award ceremonies that honored him. Even when The Tonight Show had milestone anniversaries, he stayed home. Carson spent most of his retirement in Malibu, California, living a private and routine life with his fourth wife, Alexis Moss. He enjoyed sailing, reading, and listening to music, but he didn't socialize much. His world was small and controlled, just the way he liked it. Those close to him say he was content, but others sensed a kind of loneliness beneath the surface. He had built his life around performance, but without the stage, there was very little left for him to hold on to. As the years went on, Johnny's health began to decline. A longtime smoker, he had started when he was a teenager and smoked heavily for decades, even during The Tonight Show years, often off-camera during commercial breaks. By the late 1990s, the damage had caught up to him. He developed emphysema, a serious lung condition that made it difficult to breathe, and later, heart disease. His health slowly got worse, but just like everything else in his life, he kept it private. There were no dramatic hospital visits, no public statements, and no media coverage. Most fans didn't even know he was sick. On January 23, 2005, Johnny Carson died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 79 years old. His death made headlines around the world, but the man himself had planned for a quiet exit. There was no public funeral. There were no memorial services or celebrity eulogies. He had requested that everything be kept private, and his family honored those wishes. In the end, Johnny Carson left the world the same way he had lived much of his life, at a distance, with silence. If you found this video on Johnny Carson's life interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story.